The jungle does not forget. It covers. It settles. It lets time move forward without asking questions. 4 decades rain fell in steady cycles. Roots spread quietly through the soil. Insects moved through the earth, building unseen worlds beneath the surface. And somewhere under that dense canopy hidden from sight, a machine built for war remained, exactly where it had fallen. Still, largely intact, as though time had simply passed around it. How does something created for conflict become an object of quiet fascination? And what does it mean when the past long buried begins to surface again? Because this is more than the story of a missing aircraft. It is about the world that created it, the war that used it, and the silence that followed. Long before the jungle closed in, before vines wrapped themselves around metal and engines fell silent, there was a time when distance still felt meaningful. Distance between countries, between people, between the front lines and home. In the early 20th century, flight was still something extraordinary. The sky was open, largely untouched, a place of imagination as much as reality. When pilots took to the air, it was often with a sense of wonder. Aircraft were delicate by modern standards. Fabric stretched across wooden frames, metal components exposed to the elements. Pilots relied on what they could see, what they could judge in the moment. Flying demanded both skill and nerve. But the pace of change was accelerating. Industry expanded. Production increased. And the same innovation that made flight possible was gradually reshaped for a different purpose. By the time the Second World War began, aviation had taken on a new role. It had become central to warfare. Aircraft could now travel long distances, carry significant payloads, and operate in conditions that would have been unthinkable just a generation earlier. The sky was no longer just a frontier. It was part of the battlefield. Among the aircraft that came to define this shift was the North American B-25 Mitchell. It was not the largest aircraft of its kind, nor the fastest, but it proved to be dependable and adaptable. It could operate in varied environments, carry out different types of missions, and perform under conditions that pushed both machine and crew to their limits. It was built to go where it was needed, to operate at low altitude, to complete its mission and return. Its twin engines carried crews across long distances, over water, over mountains, and deep into unfamiliar terrain. Inside, young airmen worked in close quarters, relying on maps, instruments, and each other. For them, flying was no longer about exploration. It was about survival. Somewhere within the vast Pacific theater, one of these aircraft set out on a mission that would not end as planned. Below, the landscape stretched endlessly. Dense forest led in shades of green, broken only by rivers and uneven terrain. From above, it appeared calm, almost undisturbed. But that calm was misleading. The Pacific conflict brought its own challenges. It unfolded across remote islands and isolated regions, where conditions were often as difficult as the mission itself. Navigation could be uncertain, weather unpredictable, communication limited. Operations depended on precision but also on adaptability. On that day, now difficult to reconstruct in full, the B-25 took off on what was likely a routine assignment. Routine in wartime was never guaranteed. The exact details have faded over time. It may have been a reconnaissance flight, a bombing operation, or a supply mission. Records offer only fragments. What is clearer is that something went wrong. It could have been mechanical failure, a navigational mistake, hostile conditions, or a combination of factors that left little room for recovery. In that environment, there were few alternatives. The aircraft began to lose altitude. What followed was not a controlled landing but an attempt to bring the aircraft down safely in terrain that offered almost no margin for error. Trees rose quickly beneath it. Branches struck the fuselage. The descent became unavoidable. And then everything stopped. The final moments are preserved only in what remains: structural damage, the position of the aircraft, the way it came to rest. There was no large explosion that destroyed it entirely, no fire that erased all trace. Instead, the environment took over. Leaves gathered, rain fell, vegetation grew around and through the structure. Over time, the aircraft became part of the landscape. Not gone, but no longer visible. The crew, like many others during the war, were listed as missing. Families waited for information that never arrived. Official records closed with uncertainty. Missing in action. A phrase that leaves room for both hope and acceptance. Years passed. Then decades. The war ended, but its effects remained. Nations rebuilt. Technology advanced. Aviation itself entered a new era, moving from propellers to jet engines, from visual navigation to complex instrumentation. Conflict changed as well, becoming more distant for many, experienced through reports, rather than first-hand. But beneath the surface of that jungle, the aircraft remained unchanged, protected in an unexpected way. The dense canopy shielded it from direct exposure. Layers of soil and vegetation slowed the effects of corrosion. Parts of the aircraft were effectively sealed from the elements. What had been hidden was also preserved. It became unintentionally a record of its time, a physical connection to the 1940s, untouched by the decades above. Then, nearly 80 years later, that connection resurfaced. Explorers moving through the region came across something unusual. At first it appeared as a shape that did not belong, an unnatural curve beneath. The foliage a hint of metal, where there should have been none. Closer inspection revealed more. As vegetation was cleared away, the outline became unmistakable. An aircraft, largely intact. Its structure still recognizable. Details still visible. The cockpit preserved in a way that suggested it had simply been left behind. It was not just a discovery of material. It was a rediscovery of a moment in time. Researchers and specialists were drawn to the site. Each component offered information, identification numbers, construction details, configuration. Piece by piece, the aircraft's identity was confirmed. And with that, its story began to return. But beyond the technical analysis, there was a more human dimension. Inside that aircraft, there had been a crew, navigating uncertainty, relying on training and instinct. They had spoken to each other, made decisions, and faced a situation that changed in an instant. Their presence remained not visibly, but through the environment they left behind. The aircraft became more than an object. It became a point of connection, a reminder that behind every piece of machinery is a human story. The rediscovery also highlighted a broader reality. The same industrial capacity that produced aircraft like the WWII enabled a level of conflict the world had not seen before. Cities were damaged, populations displaced, and landscapes altered. Progress and destruction advanced together. And yet the aircraft's preservation offered a different perspective. It showed that even in the midst of conflict, elements of the past can endure. The jungle had not erased it. In many ways, it had protected it. As news of the find spread, interest grew beyond the immediate region. For some, it was a significant historical artifact. For others, it carried personal meaning. It brought to mind those who had served and never returned. Stories left incomplete. Histories that existed only in fragments. In a time when much of history is accessed through records and archives, this was something tangible, a direct link to a specific moment. It also raised questions. How many similar sites remain undiscovered? How many accounts of the past are still hidden, waiting to be found? And what is the role of those discoveries? Are they acts of preservation, of remembrance? Or do they reopen chapters that had been quietly set aside? There are no simple answers. History is not only a sequence of events. It is shaped by what is remembered and what is overlooked. The rediscovery of this aircraft did more than clarify one incident. It drew attention to a wider context, the scale of the Pacific War, the number of missions carried out, and the many that were never fully documented. For every well-known operation, there were others that remained largely unrecorded. In that sense, the aircraft stands for more than its own story. It represents many similar experiences that were never fully told. As work continued at the site, there was a clear awareness of its significance. It was approached not just as an artifact, but as a place connected to real lives. Because beneath the structure is a deeper reality. People were there. They made decisions, took risks, and became part of history in ways that are not always visible. Recognizing that transforms the discovery into something more meaningful. Not just a finding, but a moment to reflect. Today, the world still carries the influence of that era. Political structures, technological systems, and global relationships have all been shaped in part by the outcomes of that conflict. The WWII, once a tool designed for a specific purpose, now serves a different role. It reminds us of what that period represented, of the scale of change, and of the individuals within it. Its most lasting message, however, may be found in its stillness, in the way it remained undisturbed for so long, in the way the environment continued around it largely unaffected. It reflects a broader truth. Human creations, no matter how advanced, exist within a larger natural world. Over time, they can be reclaimed, altered, or simply absorbed. The aircraft remained where it fell for nearly 80 years, not as a monument, not as a marker, but simply as something that existed waiting without intention. And when it was finally found, it did not present a story of victory or defeat. It offered something quieter, a reminder of time, of memory, and of the narrow line between what disappears and what endures. In the end, the jungle did not erase the aircraft. It held onto it. And when it returned to view, it left behind a question that continues to resonate. If something so significant can remain hidden for so long, how much of the past is still out there waiting to be seen again?